He vanished for nearly 5 years. And when he came back, his fiancée had moved on. His son was calling another man, Dad, and his entire life was gone. Let me tell you something that still shakes me to my core whenever I think back on it. I made the biggest mistake of my life during what was supposed to be one of the happiest chapters leading up to my wedding. What was meant to be a fun bachelor trip, something adventurous to brag about for years to come, instead turned into a nightmare that still haunts me. A nightmare I wouldn't wish on anybody. Because of that mistake, because of a single reckless choice I made when I thought I was young, untouchable, and in control, I lost almost everything that mattered to me. So let's rewind. Let's go all the way back to where this story really begins. At the time, I was 28 years old. I felt like life was finally falling into place the way I had always dreamed. I'd just gotten engaged to the woman I truly believed was my soulmate. Her name was Emily. We'd been together for 3 years, and from the very first date, there was this spark. This undeniable chemistry that made me feel like she was the one. Emily wasn't just my girlfriend. She was my partner in every sense. She pushed me to be better, she made me laugh until my stomach hurt, and she could calm me down even on the worst of days. I remember waking up some mornings, seeing her still asleep beside me, and thinking, if this is what the rest of my life looks like, then I've already won. Career-wise, things were looking up too. I was fresh into my job as an architect. I wasn't designing iconic skyscrapers or futuristic stadiums. No, my bread and butter was residential subdivisions, neighborhoods, custom homes, that kind of thing. And you know what? I loved it. There was something grounding about creating homes where real families would live, laugh, fight, and grow. My days were full, my future seemed bright, and I felt unstoppable. When Emily said yes to my proposal, everything clicked. We didn't want a massive, expensive wedding with hundreds of guests and stress over seating charts. That wasn't us. We wanted something small, something intimate, something ours. We decided on San Diego, a coastal elopement. Picture it. The sun dipping into the Pacific. The sound of waves rolling in as we exchanged vows. Our families were welcome to come if they wanted, but it wasn't about them, it was about us. Since we were saving money by skipping the big wedding production, we decided to treat ourselves to something special before tying the knot. Instead of the stereotypical bachelor and bachelorette parties, cheap shots, loud clubs, embarrassing dares, we wanted to check off items from our pre-wedding bucket list. Emily's dream? Sharks. She'd always been fascinated by them. So she and her best friend Maggie flew down to Florida for a long weekend to go cage diving. I still remember the way her eyes lit up when she called me afterwards, describing how the massive shapes of great whites slid past the bars of the cage, so close she could feel the water swirl around her. Her voice was full of adrenaline, awe, and this pure, childlike excitement. And me? My dream was different. Ever since I was about 10 years old, I'd had this obsession with Thailand. Don't ask me why. It could have been the movies, a book I read, or just the allure of an exotic place that felt like another world entirely. But for years, I swore I'd go. It became almost a running joke. One day, I'm going to Thailand. Emily knew this about me. Hell, I even brought it up on our very first date. So when the chance came, she pushed me to go. Do it, she told me, before life gets in the way. Before responsibilities pile up. You've always wanted it. Go. So that's how I ended up booking a trip with my best friend Jorge. My bachelor party wasn't going to be a wild Vegas weekend. It was going to be the adventure I'd dreamed of since childhood. The moment our plane touched down in Thailand, I felt electrified. Everything was new, the humid, heavy air, the chaotic sounds of traffic mixed with music and street vendors, the smell of spices and grilled meat drifting through the streets. Jorge and I threw ourselves into it all. The first 3 days? Perfect. We wandered temples that made us feel small and insignificant. We lounged on beaches that looked like postcards. And at night we drank more than we should have at rooftop bars overlooking neon-lit streets. Every corner of Thailand felt like it held a new secret. I thought to myself, this is it. This is everything I imagined when I was a kid staring at maps. But then came the third night. That was when things started to take a turn. Jorge, being Jorge, went too hard. He got blackout drunk, stumbling, slurring, the whole 9 yards. I was frustrated, sure, but I let it slide. After all, we were supposed to go on a jungle excursion the next morning. That was the big one I had been waiting for. Here's the thing, you've got to understand this about me. I wasn't the best planner back then. Instead of booking things in advance, we just sort of went with the flow. The first day we'd arrived, I'd seen posters and ads for jungle excursions, jeep rides, treks through the wilderness, waterfalls, adventure. It called to me. So I told Jorge, Thursday, we're doing it. But Thursday morning, Jorge wouldn't budge. He was sprawled out in bed, moaning from the hangover of a lifetime, groaning, tomorrow man, tomorrow. And that's where the crack opened. That's where my mistake slipped in, because I thought, I'm not wasting this day. I've waited years for this. I'll just go alone. I left the hotel, grabbed some breakfast, and as I was walking, that's when I saw him. A man standing by the roadside, next to a jeep, holding a hand-painted sign advertising cheap jungle excursions. His English was almost perfect, and when he noticed me slowing down to read the sign, he pounced. He had a sales pitch ready, and he delivered it with charm. I'll admit, something about it felt off. The sign was too rough, too casual. The whole thing seemed shady. But I wanted the adventure so badly. I wanted to get lost in the jungle, to have a story worth telling when I got home, and he seemed nice enough, believable enough, that I ignored the small voice whispering, "Don't do this." So I climbed into his jeep. The ride started off exhilarating. We bounced down narrow dirt paths, surrounded by dense green walls of jungle. The air smelled of earth and damp leaves, heavy with humidity. I remember gripping the seat, laughing as the jeep jolted over potholes and roots. This was it, exactly what I'd been hoping for. But then, it shifted. We pulled into a clearing. Remote, quiet, too quiet. I stepped out to look around, still buzzing with excitement. And then, out of nowhere, more men appeared. They came from another path, and the way they moved, the way they stared at me, it was like the temperature of the world dropped. The man who had been my guide started speaking to them rapidly, in a language I didn't understand. I couldn't follow the words, but I could feel the intent. I could feel the trap closing around me, and that's when the realization hit me like a punch in the chest. I had walked straight into danger, straight into a nightmare, straight into a decision that would cost me 4.5 years of my life. At that exact same moment, halfway across the world, Emily had no idea. My parents had no idea. Jorge, probably waking up in our hotel room with a pounding hangover, had no idea. To everyone back home, I simply vanished. And that was the beginning of hell. I disappeared. Just like that. One moment I was laughing in the back of a jeep, thinking I was about to live out my childhood fantasy of exploring the Thai jungle, and the next? Gone. When people talk about getting kidnapped or going missing, you always imagine it's loud and violent screams, struggles, some dramatic Hollywood chase scene. But for me, it was almost quiet. Too quiet. That was the most terrifying part. The men surrounded me in that clearing, and though I tried to play it cool, my chest felt like it was collapsing. I wanted to run, but where would I go? The jungle was thick, the paths twisted, and I didn't even know which way was back to the main road. I was a foreigner. Clueless. Vulnerable. They didn't beat me, not at first. They didn't even raise their voices. They simply took control of me, firm hands on my arms, a rough shove toward a different vehicle, and suddenly, I was no longer a tourist. I was cargo. I kept telling myself, maybe this is some kind of scam. Maybe they're going to rob me, take my wallet, rough me up a little, and then dump me somewhere. That would have been bad, sure, but survivable. But deep down, I knew this wasn't that kind of situation. The ride after that was a blur of bouncing wheels, muffled voices, and the suffocating realization that I had no idea where I was being taken. They blindfolded me after a while, wrapping something scratchy and damp around my eyes. The world became darkness, and every sound was amplified. The rev of the engine, the crunch of tires on dirt, the occasional burst of laughter in a language I couldn't understand. Hours passed. It could have been 2, could have been 10. Time lost all meaning. When we finally stopped, I was yanked out, dragged across uneven ground, and shoved into what would become my prison. I don't want to spill every gruesome detail here, it's almost too heavy, but let me say this. They weren't just criminals. They were manufacturers. A cartel. And I was about to become their mule. The camp was hidden deep in the jungle, shifting locations every so often to avoid detection. They chained me at night, gave me scraps of food, and by day, I worked. Loading, unloading, digging, hauling. I was their disposable labor. Their foreigner nobody would ever find. And I stayed like that not for days, not for weeks, not for months, but for 4.5 years. Do you know what 4.5 years feels like when every day is the same? When every sunrise means another day of breaking your back for people who don't even see you as human? At first, I resisted. I plotted escapes in my head. I studied the guards, the routines, the paths, but the jungle was unforgiving, and the reality was clear. If I ran, I wouldn't survive more than a day. Either I'd be caught, or I'd starve, or I'd simply vanish into the endless green until I collapsed. So I stopped fighting. I told myself, wait. Just wait. Someone will come. But nobody did. Back home, I later learned, they thought I was dead. My parents, my fiancée, Emily, even Jorge, everyone believed I had vanished into thin air. They searched, of course. They flew to Thailand, checked hospitals, police stations, morgues, but what could they find? I was chained to a cot in the middle of nowhere. After weeks of searching, they had no answers. I can only imagine what Emily went through in those first days. The anxiety, the waiting by the phone, the way her stomach must have dropped every time a number she didn't recognize lit up the screen. And then, weeks turned to months. Months turned into years. At some point, hope must have curdled into grief. They even held a memorial service for me. My parents buried a son who wasn't dead. Emily mourned a fiancé who was still breathing but unreachable. Meanwhile, I survived in silence. Some nights, chained to that cot, I prayed that one of the guards would just put me out of my misery. Other nights, I prayed for a miracle, anything to bring me back home. And in those darkest moments, the only thing that kept me from breaking completely was Emily. I would close my eyes and picture her smile. The way she crinkled her nose when she laughed. The way she held my hand like she never wanted to let go. I told myself, stay alive. Stay alive for her. If you make it out, maybe, just maybe, she'll still be waiting. But the truth was, I didn't know. I had no idea what my absence was doing to her. How it was reshaping her life. What impossible choices she was being forced to make. And here's where the cruel irony sets in. Because while I was chained in the jungle, clinging to hope, her life was moving forward. When I finally returned after 55 months of captivity, I thought I was stepping back into the life I had lost. I thought I'd walk through the door, and Emily would fall into my arms, and we'd pick up where we left off. But life doesn't pause. Life doesn't wait. And when I came back from the dead, I found out I wasn't returning to the same world at all, because Emily had moved on. After 4.5 years in captivity, I was finally free. It happened almost like a miracle. The camp I was trapped in got raided. I was still chained when the authorities stormed in, dirty, starved, wearing rags that barely held together. At first, they arrested me too. I must have looked like one of the cartel workers, but when they checked databases and my name came up in missing person reports, they realized who I really was. A lost American who had been presumed dead. They gave me a shower, clothes that didn't fit, and food that made me sick because my body wasn't used to eating like that anymore. My hands shook as I tried to hold utensils. My reflection in the mirror looked like a ghost, sunken cheeks, hollow eyes, hair uneven from years of neglect. But none of that mattered. What mattered was I could finally call home. I remember sitting with the embassy staff, holding the phone in my hand. My heart raced like I was about to propose all over again. I dialed Emily's number first. That was the moment I had dreamed of during every night in captivity, the moment I would hear her voice, tell her I was alive, and imagine her breaking down in joy. But when the call connected, a man answered. His name was Mitch. He didn't know any Emily. Wrong number? Changed number? My stomach dropped, so I called my parents. My mother's voice cracked the second she heard me. She screamed, sobbed, and shouted for my dad. They were frantic, demanding to know everything, promising to fly me home immediately. And every time I asked about Emily, they changed the subject. We'll talk when you're back. Don't worry about that now. Just focus on coming home. I should have realized then. I should have known what they weren't telling me. But I held on to hope. It took a few weeks to sort everything out. Paperwork, travel, debriefings. During that time, I stayed in a cheap hotel the embassy helped arrange. I would wake up in clean sheets, stare at the ceiling fan, and whisper to myself, "You're going home. You survived. You're going back to her." When the day finally came, my parents were waiting at the airport. My mom threw her arms around me so tightly I thought I might break. My dad hugged me harder than he ever had in his life. It should have been the happiest reunion. But something in their eyes wasn't pure joy, it was hesitation. Almost guilt. And then, when we sat down together in private, they finally told me the truth. They handed me an envelope. Inside was a save the date card. A smiling Emily was on it, standing next to another man. Tall, handsome, confident. The kind of guy you'd expect to see in a magazine. My fiancée, the woman who had promised me forever, was engaged to someone else. I broke. I sobbed like a child, my chest heaving as I stared at the card. It wasn't unexpected. I had been gone for nearly 5 years, after all, but the pain was sharper than anything I had endured in captivity. Out there in the jungle, I had survived by imagining her waiting for me. And now, she belonged to someone else. But that wasn't all. My mom flipped to another photo. This one wasn't a wedding card. It was a birthday party. At the center was a little boy with a wide grin, sitting behind a cake that said, "Happy 4th birthday. That's your son," my mother whispered. My world stopped. Emily had been pregnant when I disappeared. She had carried our child without me, given birth without me, raised him without me. He was 4 years old now, and I didn't even know his name. They told me his name was Paul. Paul Walter named after my father and me, and in that moment, grief twisted into something deeper. Because I hadn't just lost Emily. I had lost time with my son, his first steps, his first words, every milestone of his young life. All those dad moments belonged to someone else now. The man she was engaged to, his name was Kevin, had been raising my son as his own since Paul was a toddler. He was Dad. And me? I was just a ghost suddenly come back to life, threatening to ruin their carefully rebuilt world. Do you understand that feeling? That horrible mix of joy and devastation? I was alive. I had survived what should have killed me. And yet, it almost felt worse to come home than to stay gone. My parents tried to comfort me. They reminded me that Emily hadn't betrayed me. I had vanished. Everyone thought I was dead. They even held a memorial service. Life had to move on, and Emily, crushed and pregnant, had leaned on them. They had grown close. She had found comfort with Kevin. I wanted to scream. But I'm back now. Doesn't that change everything? But in my heart, I knew. It wasn't that simple. Emily still loved me, I could feel it. But she also loved Kevin. She had built a new life, a safe one. And my return had shattered it. And now I faced the impossible question. Was there a way back for us? Could I reclaim not just my fiancée, but the family I never got to know? Or was I destined to remain on the outside, watching the life that should have been mine play out without me? That was the question I carried into the next chapter of my life, the chapter where being alive wasn't the same as truly living. Coming home was supposed to feel like freedom. But in a strange way, it felt more like walking into someone else's life. My parents were overjoyed to have me back, of course. But I could sense the unease in every conversation. It was as if they were bracing for impact, like they knew my return was about to cause a ripple through everyone's carefully balanced world. And at the center of that world was Emily. I hadn't spoken to her yet. Not directly. She hadn't answered my calls. The one text I got was short. Almost cryptic. I'm so sorry. I just can't right now. Like died. It crushed me. But I understood. Imagine losing someone you love, grieving them for years, building a new life, a new family, and then suddenly that person comes walking back through the door. It wasn't a fairy tale reunion. It was chaos. Eventually, the inevitable happened. We arranged to meet. Not alone, my parents insisted on being there, partly to support me, partly because they didn't trust what would happen if I saw Emily without some kind of buffer. We chose a park. Neutral ground. Open space. Less pressure. The morning of the meeting, I felt like I was going into battle. My hands shook, my stomach churned, and I kept rehearsing what I'd say if Emily cried, or if she screamed, or if she just stared at me like a stranger. When she finally arrived, she wasn't alone. Kevin was with her. And so was Paul. I'll never forget that moment. Emily stepped out of the car, and for a split second, it was like nothing had changed. She was still beautiful, her hair a little shorter, her eyes tired but still the same ones I had fallen in love with. My chest ached just looking at her. Kevin was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who looked like he belonged in a catalog for outdoor gear. He carried himself with this quiet confidence, not arrogant, just solid. The kind of man people trusted without question. And then there was Paul. My son. He was small, with bright eyes and messy hair, clutching a toy superhero in one hand. For a second, he ran to my parents first, hugging my dad around the leg, squealing with laughter. Then his gaze landed on me. He froze. I must have looked terrifying to him. A stranger with sunken cheeks and scars in places I didn't want to talk about. He took a step back, hiding behind my mom's leg. My heart shattered. This was my child, and he didn't even know me. I wanted to kneel down, to beg him to come closer, to tell him, I'm your dad, I've loved you since before you were born. But the words stuck in my throat. Emily didn't rush into my arms. She didn't scream or cry or collapse against me like I had imagined during those endless nights in captivity. She just stood there, her eyes wide, her lips trembling, torn between emotions I couldn't read. Kevin was the one who moved first. He walked up to me, extended his hand, and said quietly, I'm sorry for what happened to you. It's a bad deal all around. I shook his hand. It was strong, steady, the kind of handshake that said, I'm not here to fight you, but I'm not going anywhere either. We all sat on a picnic bench while Paul ran off to the playground. The adults tried to keep the atmosphere light, asking about the flight home, about my health, about the embassy process, but underneath, the tension was suffocating. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up and walked to the playground. Paul was climbing the slide, pretending to be Spider-Man, shooting invisible webs at invisible enemies. Who do you want me to be? I asked gently. He looked at me, cautious, and then said, You can be Rhino. So that's what I became. The villain to his superhero. I let him web me up, pretending to struggle as he laughed and shouted with joy. And in that moment, even though he didn't call me dad, even though he had no idea who I really was, I felt something crack open inside me. Maybe there was hope. But then it happened. As we sat down for lunch at the picnic table, Paul took a bite of his hot dog, then turned to Kevin and said, "Dad, can we get a cookie cake on the way home?" Dad. He called Kevin Dad. It shouldn't have surprised me. Kevin had been there since Paul was 18 months old. He was the man who tucked him in, who read him bedtime stories, who taught him how to ride a bike. Of course Paul called him Dad, but hearing my son call another man that word was like a knife in the heart. I excused myself, saying I needed the bathroom, and stumbled away with tears blurring my vision. I leaned against the cold tile wall, my chest heaving, trying to pull myself together. When I stepped back out, Kevin was waiting for me. Not in a hostile way. Just waiting. "Look," he said. "I don't want to make this harder than it already is. Emily's struggling. Paul's just a kid. He's resilient. But this is a lot for him too. I want you to have a relationship with your son. But please take it slow. Don't push. Let Emily figure out what she needs. Let Paul ease into this. I've set her up with a counselor. She needs space. Respect that." I hated him in that moment. Not because he was wrong, but because he was right. And because he was the one saying it, not me. I clenched my fists, swallowed my pride, and said, "Yeah. I can do that." As we walked back, Paul ran up and hugged me unexpectedly. Then he laughed and shouted, "Bye, Rhino," before running off to Kevin again. And that's when it hit me. To Paul, I wasn't Dad. I wasn't even Walt. I was Rhino. A character in a game. A stranger who showed up out of nowhere. And if I wanted that to change, I was going to have to fight harder than I ever had before. 3 weeks passed before Emily and I finally sat down together, just the two of us. 3 weeks of circling around each other, sending surface-level texts, hiding behind excuses. 3 weeks of me bonding with Paul in small doses, ice cream runs, afternoons at my parents' house, little moments that were precious but fragile. And then came the message. "Lunch tomorrow? Neutral place." I suggested this Italian restaurant that used to be our place, back before everything went wrong. She shut it down immediately. Too personal. Too heavy with memories. So we compromised and settled on Applebee's. Safe. Bland. Neutral. Still, when I walked in and saw her sitting there at the booth, my heart nearly stopped. Emily. She looked the same, yet different. Older, maybe a little more tired, but still beautiful in that effortless way that had always drawn me in. She gave me a quick hug, brief, polite, nothing like the embraces we used to share, and I swear my entire body ached to hold on longer. We started with small talk, the kind of empty conversation people make when they don't know where else to begin. The menu, the weather, Paul's favorite superhero. It was all just noise. And beneath it, I could feel the real words pressing to the surface, begging to be spoken. When the waiter left with our orders, the dam finally broke. Emily took a deep breath. Her voice wavered as she said, "When you disappeared, I thought my world had ended. Ever when the next invaler man's infected." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. She kept going, her words tumbling out in waves. I was pregnant and alone. Every time the phone rang, I thought maybe it would be someone telling me you were found. But then I started dreading those calls, because I knew it would mean they'd found your body. I stayed with my parents a lot. Or with yours. I couldn't be in our apartment, it was too empty. Too much of you everywhere. Her eyes filled with tears, and I felt my own starting to sting. She told me about Paul's birth, how my mom was in the delivery room, holding her hand when our son came into the world 6 weeks early. She told me how hard it was, how she cried almost every night during that first year, how she couldn't bear the idea of moving on but couldn't survive staying stuck in grief either. And then she told me about Kevin. It wasn't some dramatic love affair, it was ordinary, almost painfully so. She met him at a Starbucks. She was fumbling with Paul in her arms, her phone, her coffee order, all of it at once, and he stepped in, paid for her drink, helped carry her muffin, gave her a business card, nothing more. But she called him. And slowly, over months, she let him in. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered, staring down at the table. "But I learned how to love him too." And then years passed. And then you came back. My heart pounded. This was it. The moment I had imagined 1,000 times in captivity. The moment I would ask her the one question that had haunted me for years. I reached across the table, gently taking her hand. My voice shook as I asked, "Do you still love me? Is there any chance we can try again?" Her hand trembled in mine. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face and said words that ripped me apart. "I love you." I never stopped. "But I love Kevin too. And I'm marrying him." I wanted to argue, to beg, to scream. But I saw the truth in her eyes. She wasn't lying. She wasn't trying to be cruel, she was just torn in two. And no matter what, someone was going to be broken. I let go of her hand, my chest caving in. I always knew this was possible, I whispered. I dreamed of coming home and finding you waiting, but I also knew life doesn't work that way. I don't blame you. I wish things could have been different. We sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity. Just two people staring at each other, drowning in everything that had been lost. Finally, Emily wiped her tears and asked softly, "What about Paul? How do you want to move forward with him?" That question steadied me. It gave me something to hold on to. "I love him already," I said firmly. "I want to be in his life, no matter what happens between us. He's my son. He deserves to know that." For the first time, she smiled through her tears. "I'm glad. I always told him about you. I didn't want him to think he was abandoned." We agreed on a plan: slow introductions, shared time, building a relationship one step at a time. She admitted Kevin had planned to adopt Paul once they married. But that was off the table now. I was on the birth certificate. I was his father. When lunch ended, we hugged one last time. Not the kind of hug that fixes things, but the kind that says, we're still connected. Even if it's complicated. I walked out of that Applebee's with a decision in my heart. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't undo what had happened. But I could fight for my son, and maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to move forward. Even if it wasn't the life I had once dreamed of. For a while, I tried to tell myself things were stabilizing. I had started seeing Paul more regularly, ice cream runs, park trips, even some afternoons at my parents' house. He still called me Rhino more than Dad, but I could feel him warming up to me, little by little. On the surface, it looked like progress. But under the surface, tension was brewing like a storm cloud. The center of it all? Kevin. To everyone else, Kevin was a saint. He was steady, dependable, the man who had stepped up when I was gone. And I'll admit it, he did right by Emily and Paul. He provided, he supported, he was there. But to me, Kevin was the man who had taken my place. And the cruel part was, he hadn't even done anything wrong. He hadn't stolen Emily. He hadn't manipulated her. He was simply there when I wasn't. That was enough. One afternoon, Kevin asked to talk privately after picking Paul up. My gut told me I wasn't going to like what came next. He leaned against his car, arms crossed, his voice calm but firm. "Look, Walt. I need to be honest with you. Emily's struggling. She hasn't been herself since you came back. And I get it, this is a mess for everyone. But I need you to understand something. I love her. I want to marry her. And I need you to respect that." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to keep my temper. He went on, "I'm not saying you can't see Paul. He's your son. He deserves to know you. But Emily, she needs space. She needs time. Please, don't push her. Don't pressure her. Let her work through this without you trying to sway her." I wanted to explode. To tell him he had no right to lecture me about my fiancée, my family, my son. But his words hit a nerve, because deep down, I knew he wasn't wrong. So I swallowed my pride and said, "Fine. I can do that." Which is never like for man, Maston Drafes, but inside, the fire was burning hotter than ever. The following weeks blurred together. Emily and I texted occasionally, short, polite, careful words that danced around the truth. I knew she still loved me. I could feel it in the way her hand lingered when we hugged, in the way her eyes softened when she looked at me. But she was trying to bury it. To be loyal to the man who had been loyal to her. And then came the night everything changed. Emily's bachelorette party. Kevin's bachelor party. Two separate groups, two separate celebrations, planned to collide at a downtown bar later in the night. I wasn't supposed to be there. In fact, I had promised myself I wouldn't go anywhere near it. But when the night came, sitting alone in my apartment, I couldn't take it. I needed to be out, to be distracted. So I ended up at a bar across town. And that's where fate intervened. Around 10:30, I heard laughter behind me. I turned, and there she was. Emily, dressed in a sash and a crown, surrounded by her friends. For a moment, I thought about slipping out, disappearing before she noticed me. But she saw me almost instantly. Our eyes locked across the room, and instead of turning away, she walked straight toward me. "Walt," she said, her voice half shocked, half smiling. Of all places, we started talking. At first, it was light, easy like the old days. Her laugh was music I hadn't heard in years. Then a song came on. One of her favorites. She pulled me onto the dance floor. It started playful, silly. But then her hands found my shoulders, and my hands found her waist. And suddenly the room faded away. It was just us, moving together like no time had passed. The song slowed. She stumbled into me, her face inches from mine. And in that moment, everything else disappeared. The noise, the lights, the years we were about to kiss. At the last second, she pulled back, breathless. We both laughed it off nervously, pretending it hadn't almost happened. And then Kevin walked in. I froze. Emily straightened instantly, her smile faltering as Kevin made his way over. He kissed her, trying to be his usual calm self. But I could see the stiffness in his shoulders. He wasn't stupid. He knew. Suddenly, I felt like an intruder. Like I didn't belong. So I excused myself, called an Uber, and left. The next morning, I woke up to pounding on my door. It was Emily. Her eyes were red, her hair a mess, her chest rising and falling like she had been running. And before I could even ask what was happening, she threw herself into my arms and kissed me. I pulled back, stunned. Emily. What are you doing? Tears streamed down her face as she whispered. It's over. Kevin knows. I told him the truth. I still love you. I always have. He said we both deserve to be happy, and he's stepping away. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might explode. Are you sure? She nodded, sobbing. I love you, Walt. I want to be with you. And I think you want the same. I didn't need to think. I kissed her again, holding her tighter than I ever had before. It was everything I had dreamed of. Everything I had clung to in the jungle. Emily was back. Paul was ours. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, my life wasn't over after all. But I didn't know then. The price of getting her back would be higher than I could ever imagine. At first, it felt like a dream come true. Emily moved in with me almost overnight. She brought Paul, 2 suitcases, and the pieces of her heart she had been holding back for years. For the first time since my disappearance, I woke up with her beside me. For the first time ever, I made breakfast for my son in our kitchen. It should have been perfect, but reality doesn't work like fairy tales. The first few weeks were a whirlwind. Emily and I couldn't stop touching each other, holding hands, hugging in the kitchen, whispering late into the night. Paul was confused, of course. But kids are resilient. He seemed happy just to have more people who loved him. But beneath the surface, shadows lingered. Kevin was gone, but not really. His presence clung to everything. Paul would slip and call him Dad. Sometimes at bedtime, he would ask, "When's Dad coming back?" Emily would freeze when she heard it. I would force a smile and tell Paul gently, "I'm your dad too." But the knife twisted all the same. And then there was me. I wanted so badly to be the man Emily remembered. The man she had fallen in love with before Thailand. But the truth? I wasn't that man anymore. The nights were the hardest. The nightmares came without warning. One second I'd be asleep beside her. The next I'd be back in the jungle, chained, starved, terrified. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, gasping, sometimes shouting. Emily would hold me, whispering, "You're safe, Walt. You're home." Walt. But safety didn't feel real. Not yet. I started drinking. Not heavily at first, just a beer to calm my nerves, then another to help me sleep. But it was a dangerous crutch. And Emily saw it. "Walt," she said one night, her voice firm but soft. "You promised me you'd try therapy again. You can't drown this in alcohol. I can't lose you twice." I nodded, ashamed. But the truth was, I didn't want to sit in a room and talk about the horrors I'd lived through. I didn't want to relive it all for a stranger with a notepad. I just wanted it to disappear. Meanwhile, our relationship, our second chance, wasn't as effortless as I'd imagined. We loved each other, yes, but love alone couldn't erase the scars of time. Emily was torn between guilt and hope. She loved me, but she also grieved Kevin. He had been good to her, good to Paul. Some nights, when she thought I was asleep, I'd catch her staring at her phone, scrolling through old pictures, her face caught between sadness and confusion. And me? I couldn't shake the bitterness. Kevin had lived my life for 5 years. He had tucked my son into bed, held my fiancée when she cried. Built a life that should have been mine. I hated him, I envied him, and worst of all I owed him, because without Kevin, Emily might not have survived those years. Without him, Paul might not have had a father figure at all. That truth gnawed at me, even as I tried to pretend I was fine. The breaking point came one night after Paul's birthday. He had turned 5, and for the first time, I got to be there. I bought him a bike, helped him ride it down the driveway, cheered when he wobbled his way to balance. His laughter lit me up inside. But then, at dinner, he blew out his candles and shouted, "Thanks, Dad," and he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Kevin, who had shown up with a polite smile and a carefully chosen gift. The room went quiet. My chest caved in. Emily's hand touched my arm, but it felt like nothing could steady me in that moment. I left the party early, locking myself in our bedroom, a bottle in my hand. When Emily came in later, her voice was sharp. "You can't do this, Walt. You can't shut down every time it gets hard. Paul needs you. I need you." I snapped. The words flew out before I could stop them. Maybe he doesn't need me. Maybe he already has a dad. The look on her face was pure devastation. Her lips trembled. Her eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "Don't you ever say that again. He is your son. But if you keep running from this, you're going to lose him. You're going to lose us." And so had my Kay. She left the room. And I sat there in silence, my chest heaving, the bottle heavy in my hand. That was the night I realized something terrifying. Surviving captivity was only half the battle. The harder fight, the one I wasn't sure I could win, was surviving the life I had come back to. By the time autumn rolled around, the cracks in our second chance were impossible to ignore. On the surface, we looked like a family. Emily, me, and Paul. School drop-offs, grocery runs, lazy Sundays with cartoons in the living room. From the outside, maybe we even looked happy, but inside the house, the tension was thick enough to choke on. I was drinking more than I wanted to admit, always just enough to take the edge off at least. That's what I told myself. 1 beer became 2. 2 became 4. Emily found bottles hidden in the garage, in the laundry room, even once in the bathroom cabinet. When she confronted me, I deflected. "I've got it under control." When she pressed harder, I lashed out. "You don't know what it was like. You don't know what I'm carrying." And the truth? She did know, maybe not the captivity itself, but the weight of it. She had carried grief for years, alone. She had raised my son without me. She knew pain. She knew loss, but I was too lost in my own darkness to see hers. The final straw came on a rainy Thursday night. I had promised Paul I'd pick him up from soccer practice. He was excited. I was finally the one who would be there, cheering him on, taking him home. But I'd had just a few drinks and dozed off on the couch. By the time I woke up, the house was empty. Emily had already picked him up. When they came through the door, Paul's disappointment was written all over his little face. "It's okay, Daddy," he said softly, like he was the one comforting me. Mom came instead. That crushed me. But Emily's face was something worse. Fury. Hurt. Resentment that had been building for months. After Paul went to bed, she came into the kitchen where I sat, staring at the table. She placed a stack of papers down in front of me. I looked at them. Legal documents. Divorce papers. My throat went dry. "What is this?" Her voice shook, but she didn't waver. "This is your last chance, Walt. I love you. God, I love you. But I can't keep doing this alone. I can't raise our son while babysitting my husband. You need help. Real help. And if you won't take it, I'm gone." I opened my mouth to argue, to tell her she was overreacting, but she cut me off, her eyes blazing. "You think captivity broke you? It didn't. What's breaking you is refusing to fight your way back. You drink instead of dealing with the nightmares. You shut down instead of talking. You snap at me when I try to pull you out of it. And I'm done. Either you choose us, or you choose the bottle. But you don't get both." I sat there in silence, my hands trembling on the table. I wanted to scream, to beg, to promise I'd change. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could. Emily leaned closer, her voice softening but not breaking. "Tomorrow morning, you start an alcohol program. You go back to therapy. You sit in counseling with me, or I file those papers. That's it. No more excuses." She stood there for a long moment, staring at me with tears in her eyes, waiting for an answer. All I could manage was a whisper. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Her face crumpled. She reached out, placed her hand over mine, and said, "Then borrow my strength. But don't you dare give up on us, Walt. Don't you dare." And just like that, she walked away, leaving me alone with the papers staring back at me like a mirror I didn't want to face. That night, for the first time since I'd come home, I didn't reach for a drink. I just sat there in the quiet, wondering if I had it in me to fight one more battle. This time not for survival, this time for my family. 7 years. That's how much time has passed since Emily handed me those divorce papers and told me it was my last chance. 7 years since I stood at the edge of losing everything again, and against all odds I made it. I've been sober for 7 years now. No beer hidden in the garage, no whiskey in the cabinet, not a drop. It wasn't easy, not even close. The first months were hell, shaking hands, sleepless nights, endless therapy sessions where I spat out anger I didn't even know I'd been carrying. But little by little, things started to shift. The nightmares didn't disappear, but they loosened their grip. Therapy gave me tools to wrestle them down. Counseling gave Emily and me space to rebuild what had been cracked nearly beyond repair. I found a new job at an architectural firm, this time focusing on commercial projects. Work became my anchor. Drawing lines, designing structures, it was control, order, something I could hold on to when everything else felt slippery. Emily and I bought a bigger house on the other side of the city. Paul grew up in that home, joined by his younger brother Brian, and later, our daughter Brianna. Our house was louder, messier, more alive than I ever thought I'd get to experience. If you had walked in, You might have thought we were just a normal family, and in many ways, we were. But the truth? Normal always sat on fragile legs. I had thrown myself so hard into work that sometimes Emily would look at me with that quiet sadness in her eyes. She never said it outright, but I knew she wished I was home more. She wished I'd laugh more, play more, live more. Instead, I buried myself in blueprints and deadlines. It was safer than facing the weight of everything we'd lost, everything we'd fought to hold on to. Paul grew fast. Too fast. By the time he hit double digits, he was calling me dad without hesitation. It was a victory I hadn't thought I'd ever get. But with that victory came a shadow because every now and then, he'd mention Kevin. Remember when Kevin used to take me to the park? Kevin was good at making pancakes. I'd smile, nod, and say something polite. But inside, it always stung. Kevin's ghost still haunted our house, no matter how much I tried to ignore it. And then, one afternoon, the past came slamming back in the most unexpected way. Brianna had joined a cheer camp across town. She came home gushing about her new best friend, Addison. The two of them became inseparable, texting non-stop, begging for sleepovers. So we invited Addison over for the weekend. Her mom dropped her off a tall, striking woman named Kari. We exchanged pleasantries, and everything seemed fine. The next morning, when Addison's dad showed up to pick her up, I opened the door and froze. Kevin. Standing on my porch, looking just as stunned as I felt. For a long second, neither of us spoke. Emily appeared behind me, carrying plates from breakfast, and when her eyes landed on him, she audibly gasped. It was the most awkward silence of my life. Kevin finally cleared his throat. Hey. Nice place you got here. I muttered. Thanks. Like some kind of idiot. My mind spinning in circles. The girls broke the tension, rushing past us, hugging goodbye, chattering like nothing in the world was out of place. Kevin gave a polite nod, thanked us, and left. But I stood there in the doorway long after his car pulled away, my heart hammering. Of all the people in the city, of all the random friendships Brianna could have made, she had chosen Kevin's daughter. The past wasn't gone, it wasn't buried. It was standing right there on my porch, looking me in the eyes. And I couldn't help but wonder, was it fate dragging us back together again? Or a warning that the scars of our history weren't finished with us yet? It was supposed to be a perfect holiday. Both of my sons, Paul and Brian, were flying home from college for Christmas. Emily had been buzzing with excitement for weeks, decorating the house, baking cookies, humming along to carols while she worked in the kitchen. Even Brianna, our youngest, couldn't stop counting down the days. For once, life felt full, almost normal. When I picked the boys up from the airport, I couldn't stop grinning. Paul, taller than me now, with that same stubborn set to his jaw I saw in the mirror. Brian, still lanky, still growing into himself, eager to show me he could handle the world. We piled into the car, laughing, teasing each other, filling the air with the easy rhythm of a family reunited. I thought to myself, this is what I fought for. This is why I survived. And then everything changed. We were on I-70, the road slick with patches of ice. I thought it was a good chance to let Brian practice driving in winter conditions. He wanted the experience. I trusted him. Paul sat behind him, cracking jokes about his student driver energy. Then we saw it. A crash up ahead. A mess of twisted metal. Cars scattered across the lanes. Traffic slowed, then stopped. We came to a halt behind a line of vehicles, hazard lights blinking in the cold gray light. I remember thinking, it looks bad. But at least we stopped in time. What I didn't know was that behind us, a semi-truck driver had looked down at his phone. A text. Just a few seconds of distraction. He never saw the stopped traffic. The impact was a sound I can't describe. Metal exploding, glass shattering, the entire world slamming into chaos. The driver's side was crushed instantly. Paul and Brian, my boys, were gone in a heartbeat. I remember the silence afterward. The kind that isn't silence at all but ringing, choking emptiness. I remember trying to scream their names, trying to reach for them. But pain shot through me, my legs shattered, my body broken. I survived. They didn't. And in some ways, I wish it had been the other way around. Christmas that year wasn't Christmas. It was funerals. Empty chairs at the table. Brianna clutching Emily's hand, her face pale, her eyes wide with grief she was too young to carry. Emily. God, Emily. She cried every day, sometimes until her voice broke. But worse than the tears was the way she looked at me, like it was my fault. And maybe it was. I was the one who told Brian to drive. I was the one who thought it would be good practice. I was the one who sat in the passenger seat while my boys sat in the path of death. Emily didn't scream at me. She didn't curse me. But the silence between us said more than words ever could. She withdrew. She shut down. And when she did speak, it was sharp, brittle. You should have been driving. If you hadn't. She never finished those sentences, but I heard them anyway. I was left in bed, recovering from my shattered leg, drowning in guilt. The doctors gave me pain meds, but I knew the danger an addict in recovery doesn't get the luxury of easy relief. I took them anyway, at first because I had to. Then because I needed to. They dulled the pain in my leg, but more than that, they dulled the pain in my chest. The pain of empty rooms, of the echo of laughter that would never return. I told myself I'd taper off. I told myself I had it under control, but deep down, I knew I was slipping. And in the quiet hours of the night, when Emily lay turned away from me, her shoulders stiff, her breaths uneven, I thought the same thought over and over: it should have been me. It's strange, turning back to this place after so many years. I never thought I'd be the one to write again, but life has a way of dragging the past up whether you want it or not. 2 years ago, I lost my wife and my stepson in a terrible accident. A pileup on the interstate. Wrong place, wrong time. I thought my world had ended that day. But fate, in its cruel sense of humor, wasn't done with me yet, because that same accident, the one that killed the people I loved, was the same one that stopped traffic for Emily's family. She was there. Walt was there. Their car got crushed by a semi that never slowed in time. Her 2 sons died instantly. Walt was left broken, crippled, and just like that, our stories collided again. For years, I had kept my distance. Sure, our daughters, my Addison and her Brianna, were close friends, best friends even. But I never sought out Emily. Never lingered longer than I had to at the birthday parties, the school events, the cheer competitions. Too much history, too much pain. But after the accident, things changed. Both girls had lost their brothers. Both of us had lost parts of our families. And in the months that followed, I found myself talking to Emily more and more. At first, it was just at events, short conversations, polite words. But over time, those small talks stretched longer, slipped into private texts, late-night calls when the grief wouldn't let either of us sleep. We were trauma bonding, no doubt about it. 2 broken people clinging to each other in the storm. I don't know when I started to feel it again, the pull I once had toward her. Maybe it never went away. Maybe it just buried itself deep, waiting for the right crack to break through. But here's the truth. I've been thinking about her. A lot. I miss waking up next to someone. I miss feeling like I'm not carrying all of this weight alone. And when I talk to Emily, I feel that flicker of connection, the one we had all those years ago, when I first met her at a Starbucks and bought her coffee just to see her smile. But here's where it gets complicated. She's not just Emily anymore. She's a woman who lost 2 sons, who carried a marriage with a man drowning in PTSD and addiction for decades, who finally divorced him after years of exhaustion. She's fragile. And yet, she's strong in ways I can't even measure. And I'm terrified. Terrified of telling her how I feel. Terrified of ruining what little peace she's managed to carve out. Terrified of what it might mean for our daughters, who are closer than sisters. Would bringing this up fracture that bond? Would it drag all the old wounds back into the light? Sometimes, late at night, I draft messages I'll never send. Do you ever think about us? What if we gave it another shot? Then I delete them, afraid of what her answer might be. Because the truth is, I still love her. Maybe I always have. But after everything we've been through, would loving her again be healing? Or would it be selfish? 60 years old. That's where I am now. And when I look back, it feels like I've lived 3 or 4 different lifetimes inside this one body. Walt is gone. He passed 4 years ago at 55. His heart just couldn't carry him any further. Decades of trauma, alcohol, pills, it all took its toll. Even after sobriety and all the efforts to fight back, I still feel guilty about the way I blamed him after the boys died. I know it wasn't his fault. He made one mistake. One choice. But I let my grief turn it into a wall between us. We had good years too. I won't pretend otherwise. He loved me fiercely, and he loved our children in the ways he could. But Walt was never free of his ghosts. And in the end, they took him from us. For a long time after, I thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone. I thought my story had ended. But then Kevin, he had been in the background for so long. Our daughters, Brianna and Addison, had become sisters in all but blood, their bond unshakable even through tragedy. That meant I saw him more often than I ever expected to, and little by little, the conversations grew. First polite, then warm, then something I hadn't felt in years. Safe. He didn't push. He never has. That's Kevin, steady, respectful, patient. But he made it clear, in his quiet way, that he still cared. That he always had. We danced around it for a year. Long talks, a few hesitant dates, stolen kisses that made me feel young again. And finally, I let myself stop running. We didn't remarry. We didn't need to. Kevin calls me his wife, and I call him my husband. And that's enough. We've been together 8 years now, our daughters both married. Both gave us grandchildren. Brianna and Addison still call each other sisters, and watching them raise their babies side by side has been the greatest gift of my life. Sometimes, late at night, I lie awake next to Kevin and think about the what ifs. What if I had chosen him the first time? What if Walt had never gone to Thailand? What if that truck driver had just kept his eyes on the road? But the truth is, there's no way to know. Life didn't give me those answers. It gave me what it gave me: love, loss, children, grief, healing. And here I am, at 60, holding Kevin's hand on a cruise ship, watching the sunset over the ocean. I still miss Walt. I still ache for Paul and Brian. I always will. But I've come to understand something important. The story wasn't about choosing the right man. It was about surviving long enough to find peace. And somehow, after all the chaos, all the heartbreak, all the years of being pulled apart and stitched back together, I finally have it. This story began with a mistake, a single choice on a bachelor party trip that spiraled into captivity, heartbreak, and a chain of tragedies no one could have predicted. Walt lost years of his life in the jungle. Emily lost the man she loved, then lost him again when the weight of his demons became too much. Kevin lost the family he built, only to find love again decades later, in the most unexpected way. It wasn't a fair story. It wasn't clean. It wasn't the kind of love triangle that ties itself up neatly with a bow, but maybe that's the point. Life isn't fair. It takes. It breaks. It rips things from us we can never get back. But it also gives second chances, new beginnings, the possibility of peace after storms. Emily ended her journey not with the fairy tale she once imagined, but with something quieter, steadier. A partner who had been there all along. A family that grew through love and loss, and the hard-won knowledge that survival itself is a victory. For Walt, survival meant clawing his way out of captivity, fighting his addictions, and leaving behind children who carry his name, his blood, and his stubborn will to endure. For Kevin, survival meant learning to let go with grace, even when it broke him, and eventually, being there when Emily was ready to come home. And for Emily, survival meant living through it all. The highs, the lows, the unbearable losses, and the rare, fragile joys. Maybe that's what this whole story really is. Not about who won, or who lost, but about how, even in the face of unimaginable pain, people keep going, and sometimes if they're lucky they find peace at the end of it.